Live from CNN Abu Dhabi, this is Connect the World.
An examination of the bullet that killed journalist Shireen Abu Akleh is inconclusive. But the U.S. State Department says Israeli Defense Force gunfire was likely responsible. I'm Eleni Jokos, filling in for my colleague Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome to Connect the World, and we'll be live in Jerusalem in just a moment. But first, keep fighting. That's the message from Russia's president to his forces in Ukraine. Russia trying to keep up the momentum after Ukrainian forces withdrew from the strategic city of Lysychansk. This effectively gives Moscow control of the eastern Luhansk region. Winning the adjacent region, Donetsk, would give Russia the entirety of the Donbas region. And here's what Vladimir Putin told his military chief.
All the troops involved in active fighting who have achieved this success, victory in the Luhansk region, should rest and increase their combat capabilities.
However, Putin also ordered other military units in the east and in the west to, quote, fulfill their tasks. Let's bring in CNN's Scott McLean live in Kyiv for us. Scott, it's a big blow for the Ukrainians, and clearly Putin saying that this is a big victory. Could you give me a sense of just the Russian presence and control in the Luhansk region and what that could possibly mean to extend the fighting more aggressively in Donetsk?
Sure, yeah, it is a big blow, Eleni, but perhaps not a hugely surprising one. For weeks now, the Russians have been slowly, but it seems very surely, moving toward the west, taking town by town, city by city. It's taken a while. It has been extremely deadly, according to the Ukrainians. They have sustained heavy losses, but they have managed to move toward the west without the Ukrainians really being able to dig in their heels and hold the line where they are, at least in that part of the country. This has been really illustrative for the Ukrainians, that not only were they outmanned and they were outgunned, but they were lacking something very specific. And this is what President Zelensky said it was. Listen.
Russia has enough Smerch, Uragan, and Grad systems to destroy city after city in Ukraine. They have now accumulated their largest firepower in Donbas, and they can use tens of thousands of artillery shells every day on one section of the front. This is reality. This is why we destroy the potential of the occupiers, day after day, calculatedly, powerfully. We will rebuild the walls. We will regain the land, but people must be saved above all else.
And this was exactly the calculation that the Ukrainians were making to preserve the lives of their frontline troops, pull them back and have them live to fight another day, because they said that they simply did not have the artillery power to match the Russians, as you heard there from the president. The local governor in that area told CNN that, look, they could have kept fighting for, say, another 2 weeks, but they would have sustained heavy losses. They would have risked becoming completely encircled by the Russians, and that would have had, obviously, perhaps even more deadly consequences. And at some point, that area had become so flattened, so destroyed by the constant barrage of shelling that there wasn't really that much to hold on to. There wasn't really that much that was worth actually defending and saving. Now, President Putin, he says that, look, the brave soldiers, in his words, who participated in that taking of Lysychansk, the last major city in Luhansk, they deserve a break. But when it comes to the other troops in the area, well, they ought to keep marching. And so already we've started to see shelling in Sloviansk. That is the next major city in the Donetsk region, just to the west. Some 6 people have died there, 15 injured at least. Several fires started across the city. We're also seeing at least 3 missile strikes in Kramatorsk as of late, and the expectation now is that the Russians will start to move down from the north and steadily attempt to take the towns and villages in the Donetsk region, Eleni.
All right, Scott, thank you so much for that update. And as Scott just said, Russia's war is still in full force outside the Donbas region. Ukrainian President Zelensky says, quote, enemy activity is intensifying in the Kharkiv region. This is a secondary school in Kharkiv. Ukraine says it was hit by a Russian missile. Fortunately, officials say no one was inside at the time, although 3 people were killed in a strike on a nearby village. Russia's offensive moves happening as top diplomats and business people open a conference in Switzerland aimed at laying out a path for rebuilding Ukraine. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the conference virtually, calling the recovery effort a task for the entire democratic world. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the EU will never allow Russia to undermine Ukraine's existence as a state. Now, Simon Pidou is Ambassador at Large for the Ukraine Recovery Conference and joins me live from Lugano. Thank you very much, sir. Good to see you. Give me a sense of the discussions, the conversations, the atmosphere at this conference as you're discussing rebuilding Ukraine while Ukraine is still being attacked.
First of all, thanks for having me online today. Yes, the war is still going on, as we could hear from your report. And today in Lugano, this is the start, the kickoff of the recovery process. And we want, it's too early to talk about what to rebuild or how much it will cost. But this is the right moment to think how we want to do it and to base the recovery process on what principles. And this is what it is about at this meeting.
So this isn't a donor conference where you're seeing money being put on the table. We're talking about concessional, non-concessional loans, World Bank being involved, and other developmental agencies. So could you give me a sense in terms of the structure, in terms of assistance, monetary assistance that clearly Ukraine is going to require?
So Lugano is not a donor conference. There have been already 3 donor conferences in Washington, in Berlin, in Warsaw. And here, for the first time, around the table with Ukraine, there are representatives of the G7, of the EU, and of the major financial institutions. So all actors that will be involved for the reconstruction and the recovery process. And we just want to be ready when the war will stop, to be ready to think how we want to organize and launch this recovery process.
Simon, President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke virtually to the conference. I want to play you some of what he said. Let's listen in.
As long as ruins persist, so does war. As long as the aggressor can hope to destroy the basis of life itself, there will be no long-lasting peace. That is why the rebuilding of Ukraine will be the biggest contribution to supporting global peace from all that are possible.
And you can hear that he says rebuilding is going to be such a vital step to the future and peace and stability in Ukraine. But here's the issue as well. We're talking about $750 billion that will be required. Some say more than $1 trillion. As you're seeing more infrastructure being targeted, what would you say the roadmap and the plan would be to get infrastructure back to pre-war levels?
So really, the task is enormous, and this we are just starting the process now, and it will last years, maybe even decades. So the idea is just to make sure we put this recovery process, reconstruction process on the right track. Make sure that recovery is linked with reforms, that with transparency, with methods, and that all actors are well involved and know what priorities will be.
You know, countries that are recovering from war, so a post-war scenario usually means that they're heavily indebted, they need to tap into international markets, and usually they don't have a good rating on the international market. Was that discussed in terms of what the plan would be to ensure Ukraine doesn't start on the back foot?
Yes, in a way that everybody agrees that this recovery process must go hand in hand with reforms. And only with reforms, Ukraine will be able to attract investments.
When you say reforms, you're
that's
talking about
also-
structural economic reforms in Ukraine right now that they would need to reform. I mean, they don't have an economy right now to reform, so it's a tough one.
Yes, but there are like very important reforms like rule of law, anti-corruption, or really open market economy that must be really introduced.
And I'm curious, is there a sense of hope in terms of the discussions that you're seeing right now that we might be seeing, you know, an end to this war soon? Or do you think that one thing that people are discussing is that Ukraine is going to have to make concessions, is going to have to give up some of its territory so that, you know, we can look at the rebuilding? Has that been mentioned?
Not at all. And as you can hear, the message of President Zelensky and then Prime Minister Shmyhal and also the speaker, Mr. Stefanchuk, they were all very clear. The morale is high by the Ukrainians. They really want to continue the fight, but they know that the task will be very difficult and probably long. Yeah. And yes, unfortunately, we must be two to seek a peace deal. And yeah, the Kremlin has its say.
Absolutely. Long, difficult and expensive, Simon Perdue. Thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you on. Now, Ukraine is urging Turkish officials to confiscate cargo on board a Russian ship anchored outside a Turkish port. The Ukrainian ambassador to Turkey says the ship is carrying 4,500 tons of stolen Ukrainian grain. Reuters reported the ship's detention Sunday. CNN is still waiting for official confirmation from Turkey. Ukraine has repeatedly accused Russia of stealing grain since the start of the war. Russia has denied it. Claire Sebastian has the latest for us from London. Claire, what can you tell us about the ship, the route that it has taken, and importantly, just how much grain we're talking about here?
Yeah, so we don't know absolutely everything about where this ship has been, but what we can tell you, Eleni, is that it was able to be tracked on Marine Traffic, which is a maritime tracking website. It was seen leaving the Russian port of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea on June 22nd. After that, it spent about a week at sea between Russia and Ukraine. We think at some point it might have entered the Azov Sea, and then it was seen again on June 29th, heading from that area down towards the Turkish port of Karasu, also on the Black Sea. Now, the Ukrainian ambassador to Turkey says that in between June 22nd and June 29th, it docked at Berdyansk, which is a Russian-occupied port on the Sea of Azov, loaded up with grain. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry says about 4,500 tons of Ukraine, so a fairly significant amount, and at that point headed down to Turkey. Presumably, the Ukrainians are saying an effort to try to export that grain, which it says is stolen. So it's a little bit of mystery surrounding that exact journey. But Ukraine is very clear. They say that Russia has stolen this grain. They don't want them to be able to get away with it after months of accusing them of doing this. As for the Russian side, the Kremlin, they referred comment on this to the Foreign Ministry and the Transport Ministry. Sergei Lavrov, the Foreign Minister, he said, look, we're looking into this. He thinks the cargo, he said, was exported from Estonia to Turkey, and he continued to blame Ukraine for the mines in the Black Sea being the cause of the blockade of those ports, which, of course, Russia has been enforcing now for months, sparking the potential for a major global food crisis. And, of course, Eleni, another point to make is that this puts Turkey in quite a delicate situation. Ukraine is demanding action from Turkey on this ship. Turkey is also brokering talks between Ukraine and Russia on the issue of unblockading the Black Sea. So we'll wait to see what the Turkish authorities have to say about this ship.
Right, Claire Sebastian, thank you so very much. Now, for the latest on Russia's advance in Ukraine, head to CNN.com. CNN's Phil Black speaks to a group of Ukrainian volunteers as Russia's military creeps closer. And you can read this and more at CNN.com/Ukraine. Now, new information coming out of an investigation into the killing of a Palestinian-American journalist in the West Bank. And we've now heard from the U.S. after the Palestinian Authority handed over the bullet that killed Shireen Abu Akleh for examination. CNN's Hadass Gold is following the story for us in Jerusalem, and she joins me now. Hadass, could you take us through what we heard from the State Department and whether the findings were conclusive?
Well, the U.S. State Department said that while their ballistic examination of the bullet that killed Shireen Abu Akleh while she was covering an Israeli military raid in the West Bank in May, while that ballistic examination was inconclusive, it is very notable that the U.S. security coordinator has said that they believe, after looking at the investigations from both the Israelis and the Palestinians, that it is likely that it was gunfire from an Israeli position that killed her. And that is very notable. So while the ballistic examination is inconclusive, they do believe that it is likely Israeli gunfire is what killed Shireen Abu Akleh. Now, this investigation was carried out over the weekend. The Palestinian Authority gave the bullet to the Americans, to the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, who conducted a ballistic examination with the Israelis, who said that it was done under the supervision of an American general. The IDF said in a statement that they repeated the conclusion that it was inconclusive to be able to determine who or which gun fired the fatal shot, but they did say, repeated their assertion that no soldier would deliberately fire at Miss Abu Akleh, saying they will continue to investigate the incident. They also noted that a decision about whether to launch a criminal investigation will be made following a conclusion of the IDF's operational examination. They gave no note of when that will be done, and the defense minister, in a statement, still seemed to be pointing the blame for this overall situation towards Palestinian militants. Take a listen.
Unfortunately, it is not possible to determine the source of the shooting, and as such, the investigation will continue. It is important to emphasize that during this operation event, like in many others, hundreds of bullets were fired at IDF troops, which responded with firepower of their own only in the direction of the sources of the shooting. The first to bear responsibility in such events are the terrorists who operate from within population centers.
Now we are starting to get reactions from Palestinian officials. I want to pull up a tweet from the Secretary General of the Executive Committee of the PLO, Hussein al-Sheikh, who says the occupation government bears responsibility for the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh, and we will continue our procedures at the international courts. We will not allow attempts to conceal the truth or to have shy references in pointing the finger of accusation to Israel. We also are importantly getting a statement from Shireen Abu Akleh's family. They say that they are incredulous. They say that the result of the American investigators is cold comfort, and they called it frankly insulting to Shireen's memory. They are placing the blame squarely on the Israeli military. They are basing that off of multiple investigations by news organizations, including CNN, that have found that it was likely Israeli gunfire that killed Shireen Abu Akleh. And they are also saying that they are hoping that the FBI or other relevant authorities would open a murder investigation, much like they do in ordinary cases when American citizens are killed abroad. Eleni.
Yeah, Hadass, I think, the Palestinians from the start of this, because we've been covering the story, have been very clear about the fact that they did not want the bullets in the hands of Israeli investigators. And now the U.S. was involved, and we hear inconclusive in terms of the bullet, but as we know, that it was likely from an IDF position. How important is this statement going to be in the overall investigation, would you say, in trying to figure out what exactly happened that day?
I do think it's important that the Americans have finally put forward something official. While I think it's probably very frustrating to, as we've heard from Shireen Abu Akleh's family, but it is still inconclusive. I do think it is very important that the Americans have said officially that they do believe that the likely gunfire came from an Israeli position. But this obviously does not wrap things up because of the fact that the ballistic examination, as the Americans say, was inconclusive. The Israelis can kind of continue in their position, as they say, they're continuing their investigation, and the Palestinians will continue in their position, likely bringing, as they said, they want to bring this to the criminal court. So this does not seem to have wrapped things up. I also think it's very notable, as Shireen Abu Akleh's family noted in their statement, that this came out on July 4th. The timing of all this is very interesting, especially as President Joe Biden is expected to come here, to come to this region next week. Eleni.
All right, Hadass Gold in Jerusalem. Thank you. Ahead on the show, outrage in the U.S. over the police killing of yet another young black man. The events that resulted in his suffering at least 60 gunshot wounds. Also ahead, a rare shooting at a shopping mall in Denmark. What we know about the victims and the suspect now in custody.
My name is Stephen Jameson, Global Head of Circular Economy Solutions at SAP. The aim of a circular economy is to eliminate waste, circulate materials, keep products in use as long as possible, and regenerate natural systems. We're talking about a fundamental reworking of how we deliver the economy. At the moment, we're based upon an extractive system which depends upon nature, but is ultimately extractive. That will only go one way in the long term. A regenerative economy ultimately creates abundance of opportunity, abundance of materials, abundance of resources that enable us to thrive as a species and thrive as a piece of nature and as a part of nature.
The US is reeling after yet another police shooting of a black man. Protesters marched Sunday after police body cam footage was released showing the incident 1 week ago. The police chief in Akron, Ohio, says this man, 25-year-old Jayland Walker, suffered at least 60 gunshot wounds. Police say he had led them on a car chase. Then this. Now, warning, the body cam footage you are about to see and hear shows the moment Walker was killed, and it is disturbing. All right, for more on what exactly led police to open fire, our Polo Sandoval is in Akron, Ohio. Very difficult to look at this footage. 60 shots. What have police said since this video has been released?
The video is perhaps short, but it is certainly disturbing here. You're able to hear from a very small group of demonstrators outside of police headquarters here in Akron, Ohio, that growing call for accountability that really just amplified since police officials in this city released the video to the world to see firsthand one of the latest police-involved shootings in the United States. What's important here is, yes, it is disturbing. It is very difficult to watch, but the police here are arguing that it provides further context about why police officers did what they did. Now it's about reviewing the situation and making sure that they acted within those protocols. Now, in terms of what we know, it was a week ago that police officers attempted to pull over Jayland Walker. He refused to stop, and that's what gave way to a vehicle pursuit. And it was 40 seconds into that pursuit, Eleni, that there was that game-changing moment when the police chief here says that police officers responding not only saw, but they heard a loud pop, and they concluded that that was gunfire coming from the inside of that vehicle. And it was shortly after that that video that you just played picks up when officers, at least 8 of them, are chasing 25-year-old Jayland Walker, and they open fire, shooting many times, too many times to count. At this point, authorities don't have an exact number, only saying that it will be dozens of times that officers pulled the trigger, and they do know that Jayland Walker sustained at least 60 wounds, gunshot wounds. Right now, it'll be up to the medical examiner to determine if that's a combination of both entrance and exit wounds. But that detail is what's fueling many of the demonstrations. Last night, some of those demonstrations even boiling over, forcing police officers to deploy some gas, various gas agents to disperse the crowds. And that's why today we are hearing a plea not just from the city of Akron, Ohio, but also from the Walker family, pleading for peace, but most importantly for patience, as Ohio state investigators are taking over this right now as they try to establish at least 2 things, Eleni, which is, was the use of force justified, and was the amount, the number of trigger pulls, was that justified as well? Eleni?
Big questions there, Polo. Thank you so very much. Danish police, meanwhile, investigating a deadly shooting at a mall, say that 22-year-old suspect they have in custody was known to psychiatric professionals. 3 people died Sunday and several others were injured when a shooter opened fire inside a shopping mall in Copenhagen. You can see the flowers being left as a tribute. Sam Kiley is in the Danish capital with more. Sam, what do we know? It seems like we're learning a little bit more about the perpetrator. Could you give me a breakdown?
Well, the alleged gunman has now been remanded by a Copenhagen court for 24 days in a psychiatric facility. This follows police revelations earlier on in the day that he was, in their words, known to the psychiatric authorities. Now, his level of mental health issues is unknown, but the police have ruled out as motivations any kind of terror or hate crime. They're saying very specifically this was not an issue of race or gender or any of the other ideological issues that have fueled these sorts of attacks elsewhere in Europe, notably with the ISIS campaigns in Belgium and France and Spain in those dark days a few years back. This 22-year-old alleged perpetrator opened fire in the shopping mall behind me, killing 3 people. He's been charged with murder. He's been charged with several other counts of attempted murder. At least 4 people have been hospitalized, surviving his attack with gunshot wounds. And now part of the police investigation will be how it was possible, Eleni, for him to obtain a firearm in a country that like the United Kingdom, and very unlike the United States, there are very strict gun control laws. You need to have a license, you need to have a special test to be allowed to keep a firearm of any kind. He had a hunting rifle with him. He was caught dramatically with ammunition. And we spoke to an eyewitness who saw that moment when he was being arrested and pinned down. And I think a lot of what she said has been summed up by other people we've spoken to. Take a listen.
I have never seen something like this, not even like people have a big fight on the street. It's not something that's normally happening here. I have never in my life seen a real gun. Never know like that this is going to happen in Denmark. It's not a normal thing.
Now, she even said that she'd never even seen a gun in her life, a real gun in her life. And that is an indication really of how shocking this killing spree has been in a country that really doesn't have an issue with gun crime in the way that the United States or even other parts of Europe have suffered in the past, Eleni.
All right, Sam Kiley, thank you so much. You're watching Connect the World, and still ahead, a conference in Switzerland aims to find ways to rebuild Ukraine. I'll talk about that with a former Ukrainian Prime Minister. Plus, millions of Australians are contending with more erratic seasonal swings. What authorities are doing now to help protect residents from deadly floods in and around Sydney.
My name is Guillaume Faury and I'm the CEO of Airbus. We believe very strongly on hydrogen. We are investing on hydrogen, but we're not betting the house on hydrogen. We continue to invest on more fuel-efficient planes, more connected planes. We strongly believe in the need of sustainable aviation fuels, and we are enabling the increase of production of sustainable aviation fuels. I really believe in hydrogen. That's the way to prepare the aviation of the future. No carbon in the air, because when you use hydrogen on board the plane, there's no molecule of carbon that goes into the air. And we believe that's really a very, very forward-looking technological solution for the future of aviation. That's why we are investing so much in hydrogen.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
I'm Scott McLean in Ukraine, and this is CNN.
A very difficult decision, but the right decision. That's the assessment today from Ukraine's military chief in Luhansk after Ukrainian troops withdrew from Lysychansk, giving Russia complete control of the eastern Donbass. The military chief says he expects Russian and Russian-backed forces to move in to Donetsk and try to capture the entire Donbass region. Russia's offensive moves happening as top diplomats and business people open a conference in Switzerland aimed at laying out a path for rebuilding Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the conference virtually, calling the recovery effort a task for the entire democratic world. Now, I want to bring in former Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk, joining me via Skype from Kyiv. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I firstly want to talk about, I want to talk about the fact that Ukraine had to give up Lysychansk. And, you know, we've heard the reasons why, that they were outmanned, outgunned, and they had to decide what the right route would take and mean. Militarily, is this a big blow for Ukraine?
First, I wanted to congratulate the American people with the Independence Day. Happy Independence Day. You didn't take your freedom for granted, as we didn't take it for granted too. So let's pray for those who sacrificed. And Ukrainian people are suffering and sacrificing every single day. The decision of the Ukrainian military to retreat, this was, as far as I understand, the only real decision in order to save the life of Ukrainian military and in order to build a new line of defense. Whether it's painful, yes, it's painful, because we lost a part of territory. But I believe that we temporarily lost this territory. As of now, Russia controls temporarily around 21% of Ukrainian territory. In order for it to regain this, in order to reclaim Ukrainian territory, what is needed for Ukraine? Heavy weaponry, which you are well aware of. And I do commend the efforts of the Biden administration in supplying this heavy weaponry for Ukrainian military, to make Ukrainian military more durable.
I want to get a sense from you in terms of the morale right now, and specifically in Kyiv as well. What is the mood at this point in time?
Look, this is the war, and the mood goes up and down. You know, and there is no good decisions in the war.
But for sometimes the most part, we've heard that morale was really, you know, high, that, you know, Ukrainians and the military were really ready for a prolonged and long fight. Could you give me that assessment at this point in time, or was Lysychansk a big blow for Ukrainians?
I want to be very clear. Morale of Ukrainian nation morale of Ukrainian military, morale of Ukrainian people is very high. Every single Ukrainian do understand that we are fighting for our homeland, for our freedom, for our families, and for the security of the entire free world, including the United States.
Let's talk about what you're going to need. Here's what we're hearing. Luhansk now is basically Russian-controlled. Donetsk could be the next big target. And then if Russia gets to control the entire Donbas region, we're talking about that land bridge, which has been discussed by many military analysts, is what exactly Russia is trying to do to get to Crimea. Is that a real risk right now that's on the table?
Well, look, the initial plan of Putin was to take over an entire Ukraine. He failed with his lightning attack on the capital of Ukraine, on Kyiv. And just let me remind you that a number of intelligence agencies underestimated Ukrainian military and Ukrainian resolve, and sometimes even overestimated Russians. So in the end, we managed to deter Russians, we managed to pull back Russians, and we managed actually to survive as the country. But please do not underestimate this bastard Putin and his military. But Russia is just bigger. It possesses a number of resources, including large stockpiles of Soviet ammunition. And not only Soviet, he paid billions of dollars in order to make his military stronger, in order to modernize his military. So that's not just an army which is easy to defeat. But what is needed for Ukraine, you are well aware. More weapons.
Yeah, I know. More weapons, and you know, even President Zelensky has been clear about it. There's a conference currently going on in Switzerland about rebuilding Ukraine, and the number is about $1 billion. They're talking about potential reforms in order to help Ukraine with concessional and non-concessional loans. But is there any indication, in terms of whisperings, that Ukraine might have to make concessions, in other words, give up territory in order to start focusing on rebuilding and to focus on peace? Is that something that would even be an option for you?
This war is more than about Ukraine. This war about the free world, again, including the US. If we concede, if we give any inch of territory to this war crime criminal Putin, he will move further. I know it from 2014. So no concessions, period. Regarding this Lugano conference, no doubt that we need not just to rebuild Ukraine. We need to build Ukraine from the scratch. Build back better and stronger Ukraine. For this, we need resources and sources to get this money, including frozen assets of the Russian Federation. And I believe that the next step is to liquidate and to confiscate Russian assets. And this would be easier even to explain to the American taxpayers, because you guys are feeling the pinch because of Putin's aggression too, with high oil prices, with high inflation and the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, and the world is feeling the inflationary impact. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, thank you very much for your time and for your insights. Good to see you.
Happy Independence Day once again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now let's get you up to speed on some other stories that are on our radar right now. A tornado associated with Typhoon Chaba left a trail of destruction as the storm made landfall Saturday in Guangdong province. A waterspout also touched down over coastal waters a few hundred kilometers away. The storm has now weakened to a tropical depression and is bringing heavy rain inland. A huge cleanup job is underway in Iran, where state media reports 5 people were killed in a series of earthquakes early Saturday. More than 100 people were injured, although not seriously. The most powerful quake had a magnitude of 6.1. State TV reports an entire village was destroyed. Rescuers are looking for possible survivors following an ice avalanche in the Italian Alps. On Sunday, the Marmolada Glacier gave way on the highest mountain of the Dolomites. At least 6 people were killed and 8 were injured. The area is experiencing record heat for this time of year. Flooding has become a recurring nightmare for Australia's most populous state of New South Wales. Torrential rains have caused widespread flooding and a number of dams to spill over. At least 1 person has died in the floods and thousands have been asked to evacuate. Michael Holmes reports.
A life-threatening emergency. That's how one official in New South Wales describes the rising floodwaters in parts of Australia's biggest city.
We are now facing dangers on multiple fronts. Flash flooding, riverine flooding and coastal erosion.
Thousands of residents were ordered to evacuate parts of Sydney where heavy rain is already hitting, with more expected to come in the next few days. Authorities say the situation is rapidly evolving and urge people to stay off the roads. The State Emergency Service says it has responded to more than 3,000 emergency requests already, and dozens of rescue squads have been dispatched.
The level of the dams, there's no room for the water to remain in the dams. They are starting to spill. The rivers are flowing very fast and very dangerous.
New South Wales gearing up for the deteriorating conditions, the state asking the federal government to send helicopters and troops to help with rescue efforts and sandbagging. Weather experts warn landslides could happen, the landscape already vulnerable because of previous floods in the region. In some areas, emergency crews are even ferrying livestock to drier grounds. The bigger animals like these ponies, an additional challenge for rescue workers.
Feels really good to be able to achieve a rescue and bring everyone back to land safely.
With some parts of Sydney experiencing downpours of more than 200 millimetres, with some places up to 350 millimetres, missions like this, for animals and humans alike, could become more critical in the hours ahead. Michael Holmes, CNN.
CNN meteorologist Chad Myers joins us now live from the Weather Centre at our world headquarters in Atlanta. Chad, I'm just looking at the floods. I'm looking at the image behind you. What is the forecast? When is the flooding and the rain going to stop?
It is still raining right now, although in the past 6 hours, only 10 millimeters. I say that tongue-in-cheek because Sydney, since the start of the year, Eleni, has picked up 1.5 meters of rain. That is a record for any year that they've ever been counting at the airport, when it was an airport, at that area, in that location. Never have we had that much rainfall in one year. And it's not even, the year's not even done. This was an East Coast low. An East Coast low came off of Brisbane and then made landfall almost like a tropical cyclone, but not quite, because it wasn't truly tropical. It didn't have a warm core. It didn't have an eye. It wasn't a typhoon. It wasn't a hurricane. It wasn't a cyclone. But it made that type of rainfall, 400 millimeters, right here very close to Sydney. Now, this happens all the time. These happen these East Coast lows, 5 a year on average. But they don't typically hit a city. They'll hit the remote areas, and so you won't see this type of flooding. It'll be happening, but it won't be affecting so many people. An East Coast low, a slow-moving low, comes down the coast and then makes landfall. It is almost like a fire hose of water just spraying moisture, spraying humidity into the harbor. Here's it is right there. Watch this. Now, don't pay attention to these clouds over here. It's the showers that are coming in this way. They're moving in from the east and they're moving to the west. They are carrying that moisture, and it's still there. The low has moved away, but some of the rain is still lingering. 10 millimeters on top of a flood just makes a bigger flood because it isn't going to soak in. We will see some relief. This won't be around for much longer, probably a day and a half or two, and then things begin to go down. Things begin to recede. But you have to remember, there are some hills back over here. Where the rain hit the hills, all that water still has to go downhill and possibly even toward the harbor and into other areas there along the coast. Lainey.
Yeah, Chad, well, thank you so much for explaining that to us, and thank you for coming through on your Independence Day. I hope you get to have some fun later on. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Right, coming up next, as the reversal of Roe versus Wade forces tough decisions in the US, we'll take a look at Poland following that country's decision to restrict abortion access.
Summer in Abu Dhabi. It's everything you want, but so much more than you'd expect. It's relaxing days at the pool in water as chilled as your drink. It's bonding with family, but upside down. And even more so, it's burning rubber on an F1 racetrack, roller coasters breaking records. It's seizing the day or owning the night. It's literally drinking 23 karat gold. It's uniquely designed to make it the summer of your dreams. Abu Dhabi has everything you need to summer like you mean it.
We try to be
global and we try to be smart. And we try very hard to get both of those every week. What I want to hear are authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent about a subject, who will make you smarter, move you emotionally, who will kind of challenge your mind or move your heart. And that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sundays on CNN.
This is a really important story. My name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN.
Assalamu alaikum.
Day in, day out, you see the reality of people living through this.
Ничего страшного.
Okay.
This is the front line.
On a human level, you find courage, sacrifice. This is what life is about.
A lot of people are wondering why.
You see the worst of humanity.
Putin might use a nuclear weapon. Absolutely terrifying.
But you also see the best of humanity. My job is to be present.
The human cost is right here.
And to tell these stories.
We're talking about families.
That is the most important thing.
I'm Clarissa Ward in Ukraine. This is CNN.
In the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court's reversal of Roe versus Wade, states are now in control of abortion laws in the U.S. And there are some situations coming to light that are raising tough ethical questions. One 10-year-old rape victim had to travel from Ohio to Indiana to receive abortion care. Ohio has banned all abortions except when the mother's life is at risk. CNN's Dana Bash asked the Republican governor of South Dakota whether the 10-year-old victim should be forced to carry a baby to term. Here's her exchange.
In this case, it wasn't a woman, it was a girl. Should she have to have a child? Should she have to have that baby?
Every single life is precious. This tragedy is horrific. I can't even imagine. I've never had anybody in my family or myself gone through anything like this. I can't even imagine. But in South Dakota, the law today is that the abortions are illegal except to save the life of the mother.
And you would be okay with that, a 10-year-old girl having to have a baby?
No, I'm never okay with that. In fact, that story will keep me up at night. It absolutely will.
So would you try to change the law to have an exception
in
a situation like this?
Got a one-year-old little granddaughter named Miss Addie. I can't even imagine. What I would say is I don't believe a tragic situation should be perpetuated by another tragedy.
South Dakota is one of several Republican-led states where trigger laws quickly went into effect, banning abortions after the Supreme Court ruling was issued. And the U.S. isn't the only country that has reversed abortion rights recently. Poland has one of the toughest abortion policies in Europe, with a near-total ban. And even an exception for the life of the mother is no guarantee, as one Polish family learned. CNN's Melissa Bell reports from Warsaw.
A grave in southern Poland that should serve as a warning, says Barbara Skrobel, that in trying to protect the unborn, Poland is now sacrificing the living. Barbara's sister-in-law Isabella desperately wanted a sibling for her 9-year-old daughter, but at 18 weeks, prenatal tests showed the fetus had severe abnormalities and would live no longer than a year. They went to the doctors and asked if they could terminate the pregnancy, says Isabella's sister-in-law. They said no. Then, as she was looking to travel abroad, her waters broke. Abortions in Poland have been illegal for nearly 30 years, with just 3 exceptions. Cases involving rape or incest, those involving a woman's life being in danger, or fetal abnormalities. That third exception, which had accounted for 98% of all known abortions, was struck down in 2020 by the country's highest court. There were massive protests, with polls showing just 1 in 10 people supported the move.
There's also concern within the medical profession here in Warsaw. Abortions are now only possible in Poland in cases of rape, incest, or where the life and health of a woman is clearly in danger. And that is open to interpretation. It also places a great deal of power in the hands of doctors.
And some are too scared now to help even those women who are in danger.
I talk with my friends and they tell me, listen, I had this patient yesterday who should have an abortion due to legally allowed reasons, but I was afraid to give her information where she can get it because I was afraid that someone might consider this as a breach of law.
The last Isabella Sabioc's mother heard from her was a series of texts she sent from hospital when her waters broke at 22 weeks. The doctors can't help as long as the fetus is alive, thanks to the anti-abortion law, worrying that her fever was rising and hoping that she wouldn't get sepsis, because then she wrote, "I won't leave this place." She died about 12 hours later. Thousands took to the streets under the banner, "Not a single woman more." Her family's attorney says she died of a heart attack on her way to surgery after the baby died, but an official cause of death has not been released. It is now part of a criminal investigation, say prosecutors. The hospital denies malpractice, saying in a statement, all medical decisions were made taking into account the legal provisions and standards of conduct in force in Poland. The hospital also says the 2 doctors on duty at the time have been suspended. It's unclear why Isabella's doctors did not perform an abortion. In a response to questions from CNN about the Titan ban, the government said that the termination of a pregnancy remained legal in Poland, where a woman's life is at risk. But Isabella's family believes her fetus's faint heartbeat prevented her doctors from acting in time. The 2 now share their final resting place beneath the gravestone that bears the slogan, "Not a single woman more." Melissa Bell, CNN, Warsaw.
We'll be right back after this short break. Stay with CNN.
Art is an universal language that inspires people to make a difference and to think about the situation. It doesn't only touch their mind, it touches their soul. My name is Audrey Decker, and I am the co-founder of Street Art for Mankind. Today, there are 152 million children, 1 child out of 10, who is suffering from child labor. Street Art for Mankind is a non-profit organization that believe in art for social change. And that's what we do with big murals made by artists from all around the world. We started Street Art for Mankind around the fight against child labor and trafficking, and we have a series of murals in the financial district of New York, which are called the Freedom Murals. We also have a billboard campaign that we did, and that's called the Free Children Campaign. And this one we did with the street artists, but also with people who are really involved in the cause, such as Ashley Judd, Mira Sorvino, Kailash Satyarthi, Siddharth Kara, and also Nick Kristof. Our dream for Street Art for Mankind is really to create outdoor museums everywhere around the world to have this capacity to inspire people and create art.
Inflation is hitting hard around the world, and in Turkey it jumped to the highest level in 24 years. The annual inflation rate soared to almost 80% in June. This is after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan instructed the central bank to do the opposite of what other central banks are doing and to continue to cut interest rates. Anna Stewart has the details. Anna, always good to see you. Look, here's the reality. Inflation and a depreciating lira happened before the war in Ukraine. The monetary policy that his government is instating is questionable. Tell me about that.
Questionable, yes, that's certainly one way to put it. We've seen double-digit inflation in Turkey now for years, so this really isn't anything new, but I think the world will empathise, given here in the UK we're facing inflation, I think, of 9.1%, nearly 80% in Turkey, and it could get a lot worse. Now, this is largely due to very unorthodox views on monetary policy, and you can see there how CPI has shot up just in the last couple of years. But yes, unorthodox monetary policy, where, frankly, the Central Bank of Turkey just is doing the exact opposite of every other central bank, the opposite of the US Federal Reserve, of the ECB in Europe, of the UK's Bank of England. Instead of raising rates to cool inflation, they have consistently been cutting them Why? Well, they are under a lot of pressure from the government, particularly from President Erdogan himself, who does not believe in raising rates, it would appear. And that pressure has meant, actually, over the years that we've had several central bank governors and even finance ministers being sacked for not agreeing with President Erdogan's views. So that is where we're at. Lots of policies have been introduced to try and prop up the lira. We can show you how the lira has been trading against the dollar. It hasn't done nearly enough, of course, to actually stave off what is really a collapse of that currency. Trading slightly higher today, but you can see a chart, I think, of the year.